Hi everybody, thanks for coming back. So this is really a follow-on to the brilliant speakers that we've heard previously. For anyone who's just joining us now, we've got Alison, Tickell, the founder of and CEO of Julie's Bicycle, Chris Johnson, co-founder of Shambala Festival, activist and consultant, and Yasmine Ostendorf, founder of the Green Arts Lab Alliance and head of nature research at the Jan van Eyck Academy. And they're joining us to talk about, to answer any questions you've got about their talks that they gave earlier, and really to kind of set the scene. I think thinking about ambitions and how we what we need most in the arts, I guess, to address the climate and ecological emergency. So I'm going to start off by asking all of you. I think we need a myriad of things. I think we need platforms and networks and visibility and resources and tools and case studies and evidence and data, all of these things. And probably a ton more. But if you could have one thing right now, what would you have? What do you need to equip you to tackle this? I've got everybody in a circle on my screen, so we'll go with Chris first because you're that way.
Well, it feels like a boring answer, but the thinking about the industry projects, particularly that I have involvement with, some with Alison and Julie's Bicycle. We need more resources. We need more budget. I feel like we know what we need to do, that we've developed the networks. We've worked with Julie's Bicycle in a lot of cases to establish the science and the approach and the baselines for our industry. So we've kind of got the evidence base. And I'm talking here about festivals, which is my area of experience rather than the arts in general. But it feels like we've got the evidence base. We know what we need to do, and actually we just need more resources, both from the industry itself and from government. I think we'd all agree that 2018 and 19 were just wonderful years for us all in terms of the rising appetite, and now the climate crisis conversation is centre stage, and there's real excitement in the music industry and creative industries around that, and the potential of what we can do. But we need more support. And in this climate, of course, when the whole sector needs support, it's an interesting ask. But of course, there's also an opportunity because this has been a profoundly disruptive moment. So yeah, we need resources.
Paul, and how do we get that support, do you think? I wonder, because like you say, the data and the evidence is there. People know this. How do we make them really feel it? I guess, Alison, can I hand that one over to you?
Yeah, you can try. So so I think to answer the question, which kind of also answers what you've asked, is I would completely agree with Chris around resources, but money is, of course, a means to an end. And I think what we really need, and money would massively facilitate this, money to buy time and space, is glue. And, this really speaks to the theme of the session. There is, as we just heard today, we don't need, just like with solving climate change, we don't need to learn an awful lot of new stuff. The stuff's there. It's happening everywhere we choose to look. But what we're not doing effectively yet is working together, collaborating together, creating the space in our own lives and the lives of everyone around us to really cross-fertilize and really understand, appreciate, feel our way into this new world effectively. And that's as simple as sharing good practice and resources at one level, but on the other, right through to really sort of being inspired by one another's imaginations and having the space to learn. I've learned a great deal today. I worked really closely with Chris, and I've worked really closely with Yasmine, and wow, you know, it's like, wow, they're doing some such exciting stuff. How do we develop a different way of working together? And this is kind of crucial. Money, policy, investment is fundamental here, both in terms to affect the micro, how we work, what our operating principles are, what we spend our time and our resources on, how we impact one another, the community and nature around us. Policy needs to do that, and policy needs to take a much more ambitious role in expanding and developing and connecting these knowledge bearers to one another and to the wider world.
Yeah, and maybe I can add to that also really interdisciplinarity, because what I see is within our sector, you know, already a lot of people are doing things and people agree, but when we bash against the restrictions of what we can and can't do, it's often to do also with law. For instance, the laws are not in place to support the organizations trying to really cross boundaries and sue their own governments for doing things that are totally illegal. You know, it's unsafe for them, and also this truly kind of international approach to it, because these are organizations in the Amazon or now in Chile and in all these places. they're so vulnerable also. So I think, and we're already talking about a kind of post-COVID world, but for the majority of it, that's totally not the reality. And I think if there's anything that we can call the new normal, it's really the new abnormal, in which precarity is the new abnormal. No, they are so fragile, so vulnerable, because they are not made to survive in a capitalist system. And that's the system that we are in. So they're constantly on the border of not survive. It's about survival, basically.
Yeah, and I wonder, just to let everybody know as well, if you want to ask questions of the panelists, you can pop them in the chat on here, and I'll field them through to the panelists. You talked there about intersectionality and cross-sector spaces, I think, for working, because it feels like in your talks you all talked a little bit about working in silos and fostering generosity, but potentially across sector with education and health. And do you see hope for that that those spaces are becoming available, that people are creating those cross-sector collaborations?
Who would you like to answer that, Sarah?
I don't mind, any of you. Alison, do you want to pick that up?
Sure. Well, the emphatic answer is yes. I mean, I think what's really interesting is how now what we need to do, and I think Yasmine's point about justice is so crucial to all of this, but is to map what we're doing across. So obviously climate and our ecological crisis are absolutely cultural crises. They're also crises of the system, the big sort of frameworks and systems. And the only way that we can solve that is looking at how we work very differently and mapping across. We have, as I said in my presentation, we have everything that we need. We have all the kind of, as Chris was talking about, evidence. We've got it all there. It's under our noses. We feel it as well as knowing it. We have so many solutions. We have so many guiding principles. And fundamentally, you know, we know Chris's point about telling the truth. We know this. We all know what the truth is. And I think that working on these much more straightforward principles, which are about the values that we hold and our sense of responsibility to one another and to the world around us, it's all we need. We just need to stop thinking in terms of culture as a thing in and of itself, and see how it maps across. And that's a terrific creative challenge that lots of people are engaged in. What an incredible opportunity we have to rejuvenate what we're doing and who we think we are in relation to, you know, and this is the point. It is an endlessly generous, endlessly unfolding experience that we have to think about ourselves and what we do and one another utterly differently, and getting engaged with that creativity is the only possible thing that we can do now.
Yeah, I think a lot about leadership. I know you do too, Alison, and at least reflecting on the kind of music and festival industries, you know, what does that mean? Because we have this wave of personal conviction. In fact, we know from surveys that it's personal conviction and to some extent audience perceptions that are driving the festival world to start to make meaningful changes towards reducing impacts and engaging with these conversations. And I think it's really important. We need to cultivate leadership. We need to develop climate literacy. We need to support people to feel confident to have these conversations. Because of course, and it's predicated my career really in festivals, is that we have this voice. You know, if we were a carpet manufacturer, it would be different. But we organise festivals. We are, you know, artists. You know, we're across the spectrum, and we have this wonderful opportunity to use our voice. And so I think you know, one piece for me is how do we cultivate that leadership, and the other is as part of that process. And I'm somewhat preoccupied by this at the moment. It's just what is our sense of connection with nature, and I've become obsessed with going on a personal journey from an intellectual, what I judge to be an intellectual commitment to what I know is right about the planet and for future generations, and trying to rediscover that sense of that deep and profound sense of awe. You know, I am part of this world and this ecosystem, and what does that mean? And can I feel it? You know, can I really feel it, and will it drive me? So I think, especially because of the last 6 months, a big question for me is how we steer people and provide spaces where people can connect.
Yeah, and I think also, because Alison talked a little bit about that in her talk, about that subjective rather than objective view of nature, and that our role really is to make people feel like they are a part of the natural world rather than looking at the natural world. So it feels really urgent. I wonder how, Yasmine, perhaps you could talk a little bit about how we can build up confidence in artists and organisations to be able to inform their work, because I think so many of them are kind of a little bit nervous or paralysed by some of the questions around touring. You talked about sustainable travel. Perhaps you could speak a little bit to that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge question, and it also really depends, because my mind is always on these different continents. So there is also this kind of more Asian narrative, and Latin American and European. So for me, it's always a whole different answer, kind of depending from where I'm talking. I think in what I find a little bit problematic from to give the quick answer to your question, I think it's excitement. You know, all these amazing things that we're doing, and there's all this energy, and it's not, we cannot use this chemical glue, but there is also this amazing other, you know, fish bone glue that you can actually also use for a lot more different things, because you can oil it. So it's part of that is the excitement. But what I find problematic is that I see so many artists wanting to participate kind of in this discourse around art ecology and the notion of the Anthropocene and, you know, broken nature, the design side of this, that it becomes also kind of a bit hijacked and hollowed out, because it becomes a lot about language and what we do, but then in their personal lives, you know, people really don't practice what they preach. And so I think that's a really interesting point, that Chris was saying, it's just as much also about that personal journey of reconnecting and not being part just of like an intellectual discourse or a scientific discourse about climate, but really, yeah, feeling it, embedding it, and believing in it, and not jumping on the train because that's kind of what we all have to do. So it definitely has two aspects, and I think that excitement and that confidence would come much more from that personal connection with nature and that personal journey. Yeah.
That kind of leads into the question Los Samuels has asked in the chat, Chris, which is, I guess, about how maybe within a festival context you managed to create that personal, instill that personal connection for people.
I think the best answer I can give to this is that we've learned that offering people something simple, really, really accessible seems to have been what worked. I've quite often got things wrong, assumed people are at the same place that I was when we were designing a campaign or initiative, or assumed people are willing to do more than they are. And where we've had success in terms of the festival and audience engagement in situations where we need the audience to work with us to be successful at reducing impacts. Waste is the kind of primary example. What we've ended up doing is having an extremely simple proposition, and then the audience can take a first positive step. I sort of see it as a gateway drug to sort of climate action, but an example is Bring a Bottle campaign. So we identified that most people can engage with single-use plastics and the plastic problem much more than they can climate change. Of course, it's a huge issue. At least this is the case with our festival audience, even though they're sort of quite climate literate and conscientious as a bunch. So we jumped on single-use plastics and we said, well, this is what we're doing. And all we're expecting of you is bring a bottle. Let's eradicate single-use together. So our proposition to them was so simple. For many of them, of course, they were already using a bottle. For those that weren't and thought, okay, well, yes, I want to do the right thing, because people often do, don't they? It's just the sort of the opportunity cost of not doing things is quite considerable in the way that we live in this society in terms of our comfort. But in this example with the bottles, all our audience had to do to get on board with this huge, important initiative to reduce single plastics was bring a bottle or buy a bottle, a reusable bottle, of course. And in that sense, that's where we've had the successes, when our ask is simple and when people can take that first positive step. Well, does that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Alison, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I mean, I also wanted to respond to Charlotte's, which is, Charlotte's talked also, it's in a way to the same thing. And it feels to me like there's a theme here, which is about how do we bring people along with this? And I just want to be a bit provocative here. And thanks, Loz, for talking about the bubble, because I think that's really important. First of all, I'm not sure there is a bubble, because the bubble is a sort of enclosed system. I don't think it is a bubble. I feel it's more like a flow. And so it's more like a little spring that is indeed bubbling out, but it is growing, but it's not enough. So there's a few themes that I think we need to perhaps challenge ourselves on. One is that I think we really need to exercise our own capacity, we need to challenge ourselves a bit, because at the moment we're being failed by our political leadership. Undoubtedly, we've been failed profoundly by global governance frameworks. They're not working. The UN is never going to sort this out. It's just it has to be too pragmatic. It's a membership body. We need something utterly different. We also need to change the politics. Wherever we are in the world, it's quite hard, sadly, at the moment. There are amazing places, but to see examples of good politics that actually put into the core of their thinking, first of all, what needs to be done now, and then how it needs to be done. which actually is taking these principles about regeneration, reparation, rebalancing our economy so that it actually is not an exclusive extractive economy, so that it's something different. So all of this is saying to me, first of all, we need to make the case much better. So, you know, your point, Charlotte, about making a commercial case. There is a terrific commercial case to be made for this, both in terms of how you operate now and the kind of savings, if you want to talk about savings that can be made. We've got lots of examples of this, but also in terms of the future risk, future opportunity. This is where the Green Deal becomes very important, but also we need to challenge the current status quo. We don't have time to take this bit by bit and feel entirely personally responsible for doing this. We have to recognize that the systems that we are living within are really seriously broken. And therefore, I think there's something about saying, yes, we can be intolerant. Yes, we can be we can be kind of aggressive about this, because we have to be. And the minute we lift our heads up above the immediate sort of our immediate context, we find there is so much happening. So there's something about courage, there's something about pragmatism, there's something about intolerance, and there's also a big thing about how we recognize our own capacities to drive change. And, you know, I'm going to stop now, but there are endless examples of this. One of the things I was talking about in response to your first question, Sarah, was how do we create better witness to this movement? We're so bad at witnessing and feeling this movement, and it's happening under our noses. Until we kind of create that witness, it's very hard to feel part of it. And that's a really important principle.
Could I add something to that?
Yes, of course, Yasmine. Yeah, and I was just going to say, perhaps that needs to be a shared witness as well. Because
yeah, completely.
Collective witness, it has more impact and legacy potentially. Go ahead,
yeah.
Yasmine.
No, but I think what Alison is saying about this kind of broken systems, I think we really also need to recognize that these systems are also legacy of colonial, patriarchal, extractivist thinking. And I'm very interested in this kind of in-between space between the formal and the informal in a way. You know, because in the informal, there's all the potential. There's the friendship, there's the solidarity, there's the collaboration, there is the non-capitalist thinking, but helping each other, and the way forward. But if that stays within the informal, it doesn't, you know, it can't scale up. While as within the formal, it's still the legacy of the old thinking. So what can happen? What is that space between the formal and the informal, and what kind of networks can operate there, and how can we scale that up? And I think that in between space, we really need to leave a lot of space also for non-Western, not so Eurocentric thinking, because actually a lot of these very interesting, very successful in-between forms of informal and formal are found within that school of thought, let's say.
Yeah, definitely. That's so interesting. One of the questions that's coming up a few times in the chat is around how we do this without seeming preachy and alienating large proportions of our audiences or the wider population. I wonder, Chris, maybe you could pick that up to start with.
Sure. Well, we've had some success with just taking the approach that we're doing something because we believe in it. Making sure we know what we're talking about in terms of gathering the evidence and really debating the case internally before we go public with anything. And then what we basically do is we say, hey, we think this is an important conversation. We want to be involved in this conversation. We want to provoke this conversation. Yet we don't have all the answers, but we think it's important. So let's talk. And broadly, that has felt like a fairly good platform in which to have conversations with audiences. because it's not. If we're doing something provocative, it's not that people are never angry or have a strong point of view otherwise, but it has largely helped us to stop being trolled or having sort of huge negative reactions publicly or on social media, because it's hard to argue with the fact that we're stating that we haven't got the answers, but we think it's important. Let's talk. Well, so I mean that's kind of where we've got to as a festival with anything which feels hot.
And Yasmine, have you got any examples of where that's happening well in other parts of the world, perhaps?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many. What you often see is if a political regime has been failing to look after their people, that there is a history of people having organized themselves and looking after each other. Just the first thing that comes to mind is the MST, which is the Movimento de Trabalhadores Sem Terra, the movement of landless farmers in Brazil. And this is a huge movement of people who introduce organic farming in kind of land that's been left behind. No one owns this land, and they create a community around this land so that people can start taking ownership of the land. So there is love for the land, there is care for the land. I'll send a link in the chat. And by now, this is a huge movement. They have shops all across Brazil where people come together to get free meals. Wait, a movimento. I'll just search for the link in the meantime. But also for instance, the idea of Gotong Royong, which is a form of collaborating in and kind of the building on the idea of the commons. But how do you organize yourself? There's years and years of experiences of doing this. This is MST. Yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's more or less the same link. But these are just the first two things that come to mind, but there's so many, and they have a huge impact, and it's within the DNA of the culture, because people are so used to just not being looked after and having to do it themselves. And from clean water to food to culture, resources, exchanging stuff, everything.
And perhaps here that idea of the citizens' assemblies, I think, leads on to a question around kind of maybe what's the role of experts there, I guess, as opposed to people and citizens' assemblies. Alison, do you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I just want to say something very briefly about the last one, which is that Yasmine talked very interestingly about that interspace between global citizenship, between the formal and the informal. And there are examples where they're very I mean, the Great Green Wall is a really good one, where a large number of countries that are part of the Sahel are working together to reforest the land, and it's a terrific project. Everybody's cooperating, both informal and formally, politically, but civically in a different way, to really create a space for nature which actually ticks 15 of the SDGs. If people want to know about that project, I'd be very happy to share it. But the role of expertise in science, well, it's part of a toolkit. We're living in an age where science is very often discredited. Watching the sort of growth here in this country and in other countries where science and evidence is being discredited. We have it at the moment with COVID, where we've got all sorts of anxieties and issues around evidence-based knowledge. It's something that we really do have to keep hold of, recognise its limit, that it's ever changing, but that where there is evidence, and there is plenty of evidence, it does need to be brought to bear. And I think, you know, that's a big sort of climate or ecological issue that you can see that in these very big arenas, but also it's something that we can witness in a very micro sense. So I think the idea of bringing in and using evidence to the good, whether that be social evidence or scientific evidence, applying it to our own lives is absolutely fundamental. It's about the embodiment of this issue, how we live with this issue, by not just our heads or our hearts, but actually how we embody the change that we need to see. And I think this speaks to lots of themes that have been coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, everybody. Yasmine, a few people have been asking about the Future Materials Bank. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, because it seems
definitely
a really fantastic resource and something that's speaking to a lot of people that people feel is much needed.
Yeah, no, and it's quite crazy because it's super early days for it. Like, we only launched it like a couple of weeks ago, and that was in a way because of COVID, because we planned to do this big symposium with workshops on kind of activating all of the materials, which of course we had to cancel. And so I was sitting at home thinking, okay, no one can access these materials now. And there's then all these partners who want to do things. Why don't we just make an online database in which we crowdsource all of this stuff? And so now there's, I have, I think, over 100 materials kind of in the backstage of this database that I first, of course, need to review, and you need to have the copyrights of the image, and there needs to be not a patent on the image, and recipes, and da da da. So there's a huge backlog of materials that are not online yet, but it just shows there's this incredible potential, and I'm now trying to hire someone who can help me do this, because everyone is just sending in all of their stuff, and we need to find a way to manage and organize this in a good and feasible and beautiful way. So it's one of these things that then suddenly happens because you have to change something else, and then I mentioned it to a few people, and now it's already like in the letter to the Minister of Culture in the Netherlands saying like, oh, this is how we need to change. So it's kind of and this I think is very symbolic for what also are some of the biggest challenges, at least for me and with the network, is to grow too fast. Because there's, again, this balance between the trust and the directness, and that you know, okay, this is valuable information and this is not just something random from a website, because there's a lot of websites, and still scaling up. So at the moment, I really don't even have enough capacity in a way to answer my emails of people saying, oh, I want to be part of the Alliance, or I want to register for this online course on art and ecology from a Latin American perspective. We don't even have the course yet. You know, we had 3 meetings. So it's, yeah, I think a lot of people are ready to do things and to engage, but it's also a matter of organizing it in a way that it's manageable, it remains strategic, and you can keep the quality, and you don't get a burnout.
Yeah, I hear you. It's that momentum, isn't it, right now? And on the one hand, you want to say, yes, this is an emergency, and we need to act swiftly. But then we also need to slow down and make sure that we're acting
exactly, yeah,
as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Chris, I wonder if perhaps, being as we've used you in the past as our kind of resource of, like, when we've got queries about where we can source something sustainable, we always go straight to Chris, knowing that he will already have been there and done that and can point us in the right direction. But in leading on from the kind of future materials bank and the idea that there is this real kind of thirst for more practical information and guidance, I wonder if you could give us kind of your top tips of where you would look to. And I know you've been involved in a lot of kind of sector reports that give people that practical advice. Perhaps you could talk a little bit about those.
Sure. Well, Alison and I work on a project together, actually, which is called Vision 2025. And the idea is that the festival, the outdoor events and festival industry is coming together around a journey towards net zero. We chose 50% because that felt accessible within 5 years, because that wasn't too far or too near. And as part of that journey, we've been developing a knowledge hub, an online knowledge hub. So there's a new website where we've got a newsletter going out. We've got the second edition of the Show Must Go On report, which, and I'll share all these links, of course, for all the delegates after this event. And actually, it's quite topical that we're talking about a database, because we've also identified that festival and outdoor events organisers need a place to go to. So we're actually developing that at the moment, and the database is built behind the scenes, and we hope to launch it next month. So watch this space. Yeah.
Thank you. Alison, have you got any other kind of places that you'd like to send people to for that kind of practical resource and information?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely with Chris, but also, you know, if we've got masses on our website, we've got huge amount, and the idea behind that, it's the biggest resource base, I think, anywhere. It ranges from, you know, there's basic tools to measure your footprint right through to what you might want to do in buildings. We're about to send out some new fact sheets on digital impacts, which is a piece of work that we've been doing with Oliver Eliasson Studio and various others. And something on how to pay for carbon, which is called offsetting, but it's about offsetting, but it's actually saying, you know, we can pay for our impacts in a much more creative way than offsetting, which recognizes reparation and regeneration. So do go to the website. If there's something that you can't find, let us know, because it might be there. It's got too much on it, so it's too much. But it might be there, and if not, we'll probably we might well know where you can go, because as you've got two terrific people here as well who've got amazing resources too. Can I just say, Sarah, one thing which is I've just posted, which is what we haven't spoken about today at all is the fact that we are about to embark on a year leading up to what will be the most important international climate talks that have ever happened, ever. They were due to take place in November of this year, but they've been put off for a year. And I can't overemphasize how important they are, because if we don't manage these ones, all bets are off. So the role that we haven't spoken about really at all much, actually, is how we can use our cultural, our creative capital to inspire and to kind of, you know, make a bit of a noise in all sorts of different ways. It's not there's not one way. We don't all have to be jolly, or we don't all have to be doom and gloom. It's just every way that there is to actually speak up, you know, speak up and out and to truth. And how does politics change? Well, you know, we've talked a lot about how difficult it is to respond. Well, you know, we can actually changing the flavor of our own of what's around us is so important. You know, we need to get out and make a noise. That's why so many of these new campaigning voices are so exciting, particularly as we know young people have really changed the game. And that role, particularly in the lead up to next year, I think is really, really critical.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I think, yeah, all of those campaigning voices as well. You know, I put a link in, we'll add links in for some of those, like the culture declares emergency, music declares emergency. I wonder if, we've just got a few minutes left, I wonder if I could just ask you all maybe if there's anything else that you wanted to say that you feel like hasn't come up, or that you feel like you'd really like to leave as a provocation to our audiences. We've got a few links there for COP26 and mentions for Seasons for Change. But yeah, is there anything else that you feel like you'd really like to say to the people that are with us today before we break for our lunch? We'll go Chris first.
Yeah, I've got a couple of thoughts. I'll be as quick as I can. I'm still thinking about Charlotte's question from earlier in terms of, you know, how to make the case in a commercial context. And I think you can now. You know, it's really important for brand, like it wasn't a few years ago for companies. You know, it feels like the pendulum has swung, and it swung from being the unusual one who's tackling it and putting it as part of their brand front and center to public perception asking why you're not being sustainable. So yeah, I think it feels easier now to get business on board, and it's easier to articulate that there are efficiency savings, there are cost savings involved. And there's real benefits for staff culture, retention, productivity, etc. Another element which is unique in terms of the stats. I've got stats from the festival sector, but we've seen a sea change in what consumers expect of us as festival organisers. So even 2 years ago in audience surveys, whether a festival is performing sustainably was pretty low on festival goers' agenda. Something like 21% were saying that it was important, but it's now 76% of surveyed festival organisers, and this is across the sort of age groups, are saying that it's important. So just on that point, Charlotte, I feel like it is really there is a really strong case to make in commercial context now for business. The other thing that I've been wrangling with for more of a decade, and this is my closing thought really, is this sense of systemic versus individual action. So I guess that many of us who have been involved in the pursuit of environmental change have felt bewildered at times. I've certainly felt like I'm shouting in the wind. And there's a narrative in the environmental movement around how sort of perhaps consumer change and perhaps middle classes are, who are able to afford to make individual choices to buy organic sourdough bread, etc., actually distracting us from the main task, which is that we need to come together and take serious action, the likes of what we're seeing with Extinction Rebellion. So I've been really divided for years on whether what we're doing at Shambala, for example, promoting individual action as a positive step is actually what we need. But I read a Washington Post article, I'll share it with you, which completely filled me with a sense that we are on the right track, because of course it's individual action and is the precondition for a critical mass of public opinion, which then becomes the public pressure or political pressure that you need for system change. So I just wanted to fly the flag of optimism again, that, because that's been a really strong kind of thread or debate in the environmental movement for many years. And I've really come to the fact that, yes, everything we do, however small, and every person we inspire to make a change, it actually does matter.
You do fill us full of optimism, Chris. Thank you. Yasmine, over to you. Anything else that you would like to add to this morning's discussion?
Yeah, I think, also, I'm seeing Alison today again. It reminded me how that she was and is has been such an important mentor for me in this journey, and how important it is to be a kind and generous mentor also to that next generation, kind of wherever they are on their journey. I think particularly for women also, to really, the empowerment and the confidence is so important, and it's not a given that people have that, and by creating opportunities also for these people, because yes, we know and we have, you know, certain jobs or whatever, but it is also our task to continuously create opportunities for all the people who are, you know, also still trying to get there and share the same values, but maybe don't have access to all the same knowledge and all the same resources. And I think that generosity and kindness makes us then also a welcoming sector, and you know,
yeah,
that will bring in more people.
Thank you. Alison, a few final remarks from you?
Well, first of all, thank you, Yasmine. That's very nice. I think, you know, I think both Chris and Yasmine kind of said it all. I think the only thing I might just add a bit of is you know, what it is to embody this, and it is a very much a personal journey. It's not an easy journey. It's a recognition that we've all, if we're not on it, we've all got to go on it, and to bring to that compassion and tolerance. But I also just want to sort of finally say that I think it's also about recognizing that some of this is really difficult. It is difficult. And it's difficult not just in the context of the grief and loss that we feel around us, but also in the context of power, and the fact that, as Yasmine spoken about so eloquently, we need to really think about what rebalancing looks like in a context where white supremacy, white masculine toxic supremacy, has brought us to a very, very difficult place. And what does that mean for us as white people, as hugely entitled, and also, you know, I'm talking about me, and what does that really look like? And these are very difficult questions that I think if we really are going to go on to this with the kind of integrity and humility that Chris was talking about in his first conversation, it also requires a degree of honesty, rigor, and willingness to go into these difficult places that is kind of not easy. But if we do it, wow, what an amazing, incredible opportunity we have to literally contribute the best of us. Yeah, I think that's all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thanks so much for an inspiring morning so far. Just to say to everybody, we're going to break for lunch now, but we'll be back at 1 o'clock in the stage area for the physical practicalities of committing to sustainable productions, with some brilliant speakers. So if everyone could come back for 1 o'clock at the stage area, and thanks ever so much to our speakers this morning. If the speakers and the BSL interpreter could join me in the backstage area just now, that would be great. And we'll see you all shortly at 1 o'clock. Thank you.